Well, it's finally here, the playtest that I and so many others have been patiently waiting for. The UA that would finally reveal the weapon changes that have been teased for months and months, and man, is it underwhelming. Now, I do want to make a few things clear straight away. I don't think that the new Weapon Mastery system, which I will go into detail on shortly, is bad. In fact, I think it's anything but. The system is a wonderful addition to the weaponry in the game that has been in desperate need of a refresh for close to a decade. From a design perspective, the weapons as presented in the 2014 Player's Handbook were always in something of a failed state. Many options were functionally and mechanically identical, leaving nothing to differentiate them apart from mere flavor. They lacked any sort of depth that would have allowed the weapons to feel special or unique. All in all, it was a functional, albeit bland, system. This sorry state of affairs for the weapons in 5th edition, combined with the fact that its martial classes are generally less potent both in and out of combat as compared to their spellcasting counterparts, set the stage for what was sure to be an easy win for the design team. Deliver a mechanical system for weapons that make them feel unique, powerful, and tactical, while simultaneously enabling martial classes to feel like they are relevant both in and out of combat. I will say though that I do believe the team has delivered on part of the ask, but not really in the way that many, including myself, had really been hoping for. The Weapon Mastery system, as introduced in the latest 9th Arcana playtest packet, seeks to address the common complaints by assigning to each weapon, both martial and simple, melee and ranged, a mastery that is an additional feature inherent to each weapon, that, if the wielder has access to the Weapon Mastery feature, is able to potentially unlock additional powers for that weapon. There are 9 Weapon Masteries in total. These are Cleave, which allows you on a successful hit to make another attack roll against a creature within 5 feet of the first creature, provided that it is still in range of you. If you hit, you roll damage as normal, though you don't apply the weapon's ability modifier unless it's negative. This is similar to how the extra attack from the light weapon property works. Flex lets you use the versatile damage die in a hit, even if you're only wielding it in one hand. Graze allows an attack roll that missed to still deal damage equal to the ability modifier used for the weapon. The Nick Mastery combines with the light weapon property to allow the extra attack from the feature to be combined into the original attack action rather than requiring a bonus action. Push allows you on a successful hit to push a creature up to 10 feet away, provided that it is no more than one size larger than you. Sap on a hit imposes disadvantage on the creature's next attack roll before the start of your next turn. If you hit a creature and deal damage to it, Slow reduces the creature's speed by 10 feet until the start of your next turn. This ability cannot stack. Topple on a hit forces the creature to make a Constitution saving throw, and on a failed save, the creature is knocked prone. Finally, Vex grants advantage on your next attack roll against that creature before the end of your next turn, provided that you did successfully hit it. As you can probably see, there's nothing necessarily or overtly bad about any of these. They all serve as a buff to some degree for each type of weapon. It's not hard to see that they were likely inspired by the Battlemaster fighter's maneuvers in large part, though none of these are anywhere nearly as good. However, I'm totally okay with that being the case. What I struggle with is that while Wizards has absolutely addressed one problem, the mundanity of weapons, they still haven't delivered on the original ask, in that there's very little, if anything, tactical about any of these changes, and both fighters and barbarians have not really had any meaningful improvement to their combat prowess or out-of-combat utility, save for a few small exceptions which I will detail in their respective videos. In the Weapons and Overview video with Jeremy Crawford, he kept making reference to how these changes made combat feel so much more cinematic in nature, and to a certain extent, I think he is probably right. Many of these 9 properties allow a weapon to accomplish something that seems completely logical that it should have always been able to do. Cleaving through multiple enemies at once, nailing the perfect shot to the leg and slowing down an enemy, pushing an enemy back, knocking them down. These all just make sense and are exactly the type of things that you would see happening in a movie. Where it loses some of that cinematic nature is when the character begins frantically swapping weapons on each turn to utilize a different weapon effect. This to me is where the new system feels underwhelming. Don't get me wrong, I do like and appreciate that each weapon now has a reason to have or use it. They feel a bit more powerful and a bit more unique, but there's simply no tactical element to it whatsoever. And yes, I know that not everyone necessarily wants that from the game, and the team has stated that they are constantly looking at ways of addressing the pace of combat, but I'm not so convinced that a simple yes or no question would dramatically bog down the speed of play. As presented right now, there's essentially no reason you wouldn't use the additional power on the weapon, so as a result, the system feels uninteresting. If your weapon has flex, you're going to take the larger damage die, even if it only adds 1 damage on average. If there's 2 creatures next to each other, you're going to cleave, outside of the niche scenario where one might have a feature that impacts you on a hit. If you can sap, you're going to cause disadvantage. If you have Vex, you're going to take advantage. If your weapon has nick and is a light weapon property, why would you ever not take the improved action economy of still having access to your bonus action? There is nothing interesting about this system, since there's essentially no choices to be made outside of a few very niche scenarios. In large part, it feels as though the system was kept so mundane in an effort to ensure that the fighter would have a slightly more interesting twist on the weapon mastery system. At 7th level, fighters gain the weapon expert feature. This allows them on a long rest to replace the mastery property on a weapon that they are using with another mastery property that weapon is eligible to use. This is a once per day static decision. This is followed up all the way at 13th level with the weapon adept feature, which allows the character to place 2 mastery properties on their weapon, but they can still only use one at a time. It's only at this stage where the system becomes even a little bit interesting, and I think the baseline version of the system should be so much closer to this version than what we are looking at today. Here's my suggestion for how I think the weapon mastery system could be improved. As usual, I'm not really going to touch on power of the individual properties, though I do think they could probably be increased. I'll leave that to the people who are a little bit more invested and knowledgeable in that aspect of the game. Instead, I want to focus on how I think the design team could restructure the existing system to make it more interesting and valuable to players. Firstly, it feels like the priority was set incorrectly. As I mentioned, it feels as though the system was limited so heavily so that the fighter could have the features that make it better. To be clear, I'm 100% okay with the fighter still having the best overall version of the system, but I do think that the baseline version could be made so much better without encroaching in the fighter's territory. I think the weapon proficiencies that you have should determine the masteries that you have access to, and that each weapon should have a few different masteries to select from. Battle axes should have the topple and cleave masteries. Greatswords should have the graze and push masteries. Daggers should have the nick and sap masteries. These are just a few examples off the top of my head. I'm not saying they're perfect, but it's merely for explanatory purposes. While in general I don't think that the masteries should be able to stack, a possible interesting adjustment could be to give the player the choice of whether they want to use multiple masteries at the same time, and if they choose to do so, they get something like disadvantage on their next roll due to the exceptional force or precision required to stack those masteries. A simple tweak like this, which again I'm not saying is perfect, I think still incentivizes the weapon hunt, gives more of a reason for weapon proficiencies, while simultaneously providing moment-to-moment decisions to be made during combat for the martial character. A change such as this would obviously require an adjustment to the fighter's new weapon expert and weapon adept features, but I think that is a trade-off that is more than justified. Again, I still think the fighter should have the best version of the feature, but having them wait until 13th level before it even becomes moderately interesting feels like a huge miss. Another potential alternative to the version presented in this UA would be to tie weapon masteries to the character. When the character receives the weapon mastery feature, they choose a certain number of masteries that they know and can apply those masteries to any weapon. Obviously, some that have prerequisites, such as Flex needing a versatile weapon or Nick needing a light weapon, would still apply. The amount of masteries known can increase as the characters level up. The downside of this system is that the weapons do lose some of their unique identity as compared to the current UA, so maybe the right answer falls somewhere in between these two choices. A benefit of this one is that it also does pave the way for including new masteries down the line as more and more books are released. Ultimately, I do think that the weapon mastery system is a good start. It creates a reason to want to use a certain weapon and improves the abilities available to martial classes in the midst of combat, but it does so in such a generic and mundane way that it feels very hard to be excited about it. It does create some semblance of cinematic encounters, but kneecaps it in favor of the fighter having a marginally better version of it all the way at a level where most players never even get to. I don't want to sound overly negative or critical, that is never my goal. I just think that I and so many other players were really looking forward to this system and are feeling a bit underwhelmed by its current iteration. I remain hopeful that the team is listening to the feedback and will adjust the weapon mastery system in future updates, but we all just need to make sure that we give our feedback. Let me know what you like or don't like about the weapon mastery feature in the comments below. I'm interested to hear what you all have to say. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of my coverage of this massive UA as well, but otherwise, take care.